So here's a fun fact, boys. The elixir cost of arrows is just as far away from snowball and log as it is away from fireball and poison. With that in mind, why do we regard arrows as a small spell and not a big spell, when they're just as close in elixir cost to both categories? This thought sparked my fear on arrows, so here's why I think arrows suck. Also, as a side note to like the entire video, I just want you to note down how many times I actually use arrows in the background gameplay. It's very rare because the card is just that bad. Usually spells are my most used cards, especially my small ones, but I really only use arrows here if my opponent has minions or if I need to cycle tower damage. Just what you'll see is like very rare. Let's start by talking about why they're not compared to big spells. If we take Fireball, the closest big spell to compare to, we can see a clear winner between the two. Fireball will hit about 20 tiles on the arena with its radius, and arrows will hit around 50. However, hitting 2.5 times as many tiles is the only advantage to running arrows. You will very rarely hit anything in that arrow radius that Fireball couldn't deal with. If your opponent places a minion horde, for example, you can most definitely hit all of those minions with a Fireball too. You just need better aim than if you were to use arrows. So once you learn how to aim your spells, the larger radius of arrows becomes useless, thus making arrows a spell that's better for newer players, more so than a good spell on the meta right now. Fireball does 2.5 times more damage, which is a much bigger reason to run Fireball. It'll kill anything that arrows can with an extra advantage against buildings, mini-tanks, and any medium health units that Fireball either kills or brings close to death. These are the likes of magic archers or musketeers, things that arrows are pretty useless against. Not to mention, Fireball also has a knockback. This is useful for resetting things like Inferno Dragons, pushing units into the other lane, and slowing the overall approach of things like Hog Riders. Enough about Fireball, let's talk about arrows themselves, and mainly their damage. They only actually do 243, which is enough to take out princesses etc, but it's only an even trade, and you only get 86 tower damage for that. Other small spells like Log will do this for 2 elixir, and give you around about the same tower damage. Talking of Log, let's do an in-depth comparison between the two small spells. Log has basically the same damage interaction as arrows, but obviously it doesn't hit air. But how important actually is hitting air? Arrows will really only have good air interactions against like 4 cards, those being Bats, Minions, Horde, and Hound. So is hitting air really that useful when these cards only have a combined usage rate of around 40% right now? Log's damage area is 43 tiles, which is its width times by its range. Arrows again has 50 tiles of range. This means that arrows only affect 7 more tiles than the Log, which is a very minute detail. So they're about the same effect size and have the same interactions, so why on earth do arrows cost 1 more elixir? Log gives you an extra positive 1 elixir trade in every interaction, and once again this is before we even mention an effect. With Log's knockback, it can also reset things like princes, knock units into the other lane like Fireball, and slow approaches of all win conditions in a pinch. This is way more value than being able to kill 4 air units, and I would believe that even if arrows were 2 elixir, Log still might be a better card. Log also has a form of area of denial. When it's first placed, the 11 tiles in front of the Log cannot be used by your opponent whilst the Log is travelling, denying the area from being played in. All of those things arrows cannot offer you, and that's just my comparison with Log. Snowball, Zap, and Barbarian Barrel all have better usage and win rates than arrows right now. Each of these small spells offer their own unique effect, a knockback, a stun, and a barbarian respectively. They also all cost 1 less elixir than arrows. Although I should side note here, there was a leaked balance change about Barbarian Barrel going back to 3 elixir, but that hasn't been confirmed at the time of recording this, so right now they're all 2 elixir. I'm not going to waste your time and do a deep comparison with all of these 3 small spells like I did with Log, but you can see that these smaller spells all offer an effect and are cheaper without sacrificing too many interactions. Now I want to talk about how we possibly balance arrows. I think it's important to remember how arrows are only 1 elixir away from big spells, yet they're nowhere near the power level of poison or even Fireball. Therefore I think it struggles with a similar problem that Giant Goblin did. Its role within the game isn't entirely defined. It's in a weird middle ground between big and small spell, and we don't really know which stats it needs to be balanced at 3 elixir spot. Personally I think Supercell have 3 options here. Firstly, we can keep them at 3 elixir, but change the effectiveness of the spell. Changing the radius won't really do too much, it's already large enough to rarely miss things, so I wouldn't suggest doing that. Upping the radius even more just makes it more noob friendly, but changes basically nothing for more experienced players. You could buff the damage, allowing arrows to kill archers, but I don't think that would make them meta alone. I do think, however, if they killed archers and gained an effect, like a small snare or something, then they could become useful to players. My second idea is to allow arrows to kill bombers. However, that would make arrows a 400 damage spell. Maybe they should be able to kill bombers, but get a small radius nerf, like to the size of Fireball or something. I think this is a less likely outcome for Supercell to choose. Firstly, because it's way too close to Fireball, and secondly, they want arrows to be noob friendly, seeing as it is one of the first 2 spells you obtain when you start Clash Royale. My third and final suggestion would be to take arrows down to 2 elixir. I don't think there would need to be any interaction change with this, but maybe just give them a smaller radius just to make sure they're not entirely OP. I honestly think that arrows are weak enough to stay at the same stats but become 2 elixir. The only problem with this would be that minion haul becomes completely useless when facing arrows, so I actually prefer my other 2 options to this one. In conclusion, I think arrows have gotten weaker with time in Clash Royale. New small spells have come out, all costing 2 elixir, and adding cool effects to the game, which has made arrows sorta redundant. Arrows haven't been buffed to keep up with the times, and such a major rework to make up for this is needed in my opinion. Either killing archers with an effect, killing bomber with a smaller radius, or becoming 2 elixir would be my suggestion. However, I'm not on the balance team and sorta just did this as a side project for you guys. With that said, let me know what you think about arrows in the comments down below. Do you think they need a buff, maybe a rework, or do you think they serve a unique role within the game and don't need to be touched? Which of my balance suggestions do you think are best? Let me know. But yeah boys, I hope you enjoyed this video, thank you all for watching, and peace.